This is my proposal to reduce the debt in Australia, and it is to sell Tasmania to New Zealand. For those who don't know, this is Australia, that's Tasmania, and this is the country that I propose selling Tasmania to. New Zealand's famous for Lord of the Rings. If you ever go to Tasmania, it's the same thing. Lots of trees, lots of mountains, some snow. It's a much better fit for New Zealand. Australia, everyone thinks crocodiles and deserts and Ayers Rock and things like that. Tasmania just doesn't fit in with that scenario. You have to go across the water to get there. Most people don't go there. Most people in Australia haven't been there. It's close to New Zealand. It's a nice fit for everyone. But let me compel my argument further. Mostly my argument is economic. Tasmania is an economic basket case and always has been. That top line there is the unemployment rate of the best performing state, economic state in Australia, which, fair disclosure, is my state, Western Australia. At no point in time in the last 50 years has Tasmania's unemployment rate ever closed in on ours. In fact, it's not even got close. COVID, there was the only time that they almost touched, but that's because we jumped into our lockdown before Tasmania's. Sorry, but the unemployment rate's pretty bad. And the employment participation rate is just as bad. So of the people that they've got who wants a job, mostly, in fact, always Western Australians want jobs more than Tasmanians want jobs. There's always been a huge amount of unemployed and people are just not looking for jobs in Tasmania. And that's especially galling, given that that blue line there is the West Australian population rate. Even though our population has tripled over the last 50 years, we've always been able to find jobs for those people, and those people have always wanted to work. However, Tasmania, their population's barely moved, and they've still got a stifled unemployment rate. There you have it. Western Australia makes 17.5%, Queensland 19%, New South Wales 30%. Tasmania makes 1.7% of our GDP. And okay, South Australia only makes 5.6%, but most of that's desert. Like that's all desert there, right? There's maybe some people down here in South Australia, and they still outperform Tasmania, which is an economic basket case, as I've said, and we should sell it to New Zealand. This is a little confusing, but in Australia we have a sales tax called the GST, the Goods and Services Tax. So whenever someone sells something, 1/11th of it goes off to the federal government and it keeps it, and at the end of every year it gives it back to the states. But it doesn't give it back to the states. It doesn't give back to the states what they earned. It gives back to the states what they think is fair. So it's straight socialism. So there you have it at the top. Western Australia earned, for every dollar that it earned, it got 42 cents back until we eventually got 70 cents back, which we were kind of happy about. But what's the incentive for us to work hard where our money goes away from us and we don't get it back? Well, where does it go? To Tasmania, basically. It doesn't really go to New South Wales or Victoria, not really to Queensland either, South Australia a bit, but everyone sympathises with South Australia, especially the Northern Territory, because it's mostly desert. And they've got rural communities that get serviced by, the friggin' Royal Flying Doctor Service and things. Those things aren't easy. But Tasmania takes, for every dollar that it earns, it gets $2 back. And that money comes from WA. And that galls a lot of West Australians. But the real thing is, what incentive does Tasmania have to work hard? Look at this graph. It's really informative. That's how much, per capita, WA spends on its citizens. So let's say that's $14,000 per citizen on schools and hospitals and roads and bridges and the rest of it. However, Tasmania spends, I think, I got the binoculars out there and had a look, Tasmania spends even more on its citizens, not by much, but even more, even though it makes less. How does that work? That light blue line there is actually the money that WA makes for itself. That light blue line is actually the money Tasmania makes for itself. What is it? It's well less than half. So how can Tasmania afford to spend as much or even more than Western Australia? Well, because of the orange line. The orange line is just straight government handouts. Even if Tasmania works really hard and takes a lot of risks and chances and gets that light blue line up to there, it won't make any difference because this orange line will only be that little bit there. Why work hard? They're not only a basket state, but they're welfare dependent as well. It gets worse. If the average wage rate in Australia is 0%, West Australians tend to make about 4% more than the average wage rate. Tasmanians make about 5% less. You could get up right now from Tasmania, move to WA, and you get 9% pay increase just like that. And property's cheaper in WA. If you're young and you're looking to buy a home, don't be in Tasmania, it's too expensive. Be in WA, it's even cheaper and you'll get paid 9% more. And that's what's happening in Tasmania. All its people that get university degrees, all its doctors and teachers and nurses and things, pick up and move, and you can't blame them for doing so. Here's an article that you can read for yourself if you want to go Google it. It's by Misha Ketchell from 2013 on theconversation.com. But it says that the problem is simple and intractable, that Tasmania just has a way of life, a mode of doing things, a demographic, a culture, and an economy that reproduces underachievement generation after generation. Don't tell the Kiwis about this or they won't buy the bloody thing. But that seems pretty hard to fix. It says Tasmania doesn't change because people don't want to change, and only like a third to a quarter of Tasmanians actually make money from the private sector. So even if their companies do become super profitable, 2/3 of the country is still on the government teat. And this is really shocking. A recent study said that, or this is from 2013, but there's a conclusion by the large proportion of Tasmanians that not being educated is an important aspect of being a, quote, true Tasmanian and even a good person. Whatever, man, that's a disaster. That's a deeply cultural problem that's happening down there. And unfortunately, this article from 2 years ago tends to point out that the same thing is still happening and that proper change hasn't happened down there and doesn't happen down there, and it seems unlikely to happen. And honestly, why would they change? Even if they don't develop their own strong economy down there, they're not going to get any more money. They'll just get less handouts and they'll just be treading water in spite of all of their efforts. Now it gets even worse because we've just had COVID and all the states in Australia, and indeed Australia as a whole, is reeling from ruining the economy and from all of the debt or the money that we printed. All of the states are going to be trying to lure workers to their states so the workers can buy houses and pay stamp duty and pay taxes and try and fix the budget. And you can see Victoria's taking the lead, which has stated outright that it's going to spend $155 billion by the middle of 2024 to create 200,000 and then 400,000 jobs in the next couple of years. Tasmania can't compete with that. It can't spend more money than Victoria. It needs a miracle to be able to attract workers down to Tasmania. Can't compete with WA, can't compete with Queensland, New South Wales either, and I don't know if it can even compete with South Australia. So here's the miracle it was after, and this is really good. The AFL, which is like our NFL, which is like our biggest sport down here, has announced that it will allow a Tasmanian team to enter the AFL for the first time ever if they build a big stadium. And the stadium has to be, I think it's a $785 million bill, which is big, but the federal government will pay $240 million of it. Private businesses will pay $85 million of it. And I think the AFL's up for $5 million themselves or something, leaving Tasmania with only $375 million of a $785 million build for it to come up with on its own. I mean, what a bargain. They're just getting free money. Someone's just going to come and tip a whole bunch of money, but in big enough quantities that they might actually kickstart something down there. But all their people are protesting it and saying it's stupid and a waste of money. Before I go to the protests, take a look. Perth is the capital city of Western Australia. In 2017, we built a stadium, not for $785 million, but for $2.2 billion, for much more, and we didn't get a dime. We didn't get anything from the federal government. We didn't get anything from the AFL or from private business. Taxpayers in his state pay for it all themselves. However, Tasmania is getting $240 million, like so much money just tipped in, and still they whinge. And you might say, but Michael, WA is a bigger state. But the Perth Stadium bill was 6.1% of our annual budget. All Tasmania's been asked to contribute is 4.9%, which is still big, but it's money for them. And I think that they don't really understand how the economy works. First, let's take a look at the protests down there.
What is this? Tasmania's about a bloody gutful over your stadium, and you can stick it up your bum.
Actually controversial down here, and in fact on Saturday there were thousands attended a rally outside State Parliament House, many thousands protesting against it. In essence, we have a proposal here for a stadium that most Tasmanians they don't need, they don't want, and they can't afford.
So this is what you got to do if you want to have like economic improvement. You got to do something to attract, say, 20,000, 30,000 new people to come down. 20,000, 30,000 primary workers, whether they're miners or construction or whoever they are, turn up in Tasmania and try and put their roots down. They try and buy a house. That makes property prices increase. That means every Tasmanian gets richer. Everyone still has their debt reducing as they pay it off, but as their property price goes up, the equity gap gets bigger, and this is pure profit that they can then borrow against and go out and start a business. Or go out and buy a new car so the car sales yard gets richer, or go out and put a pool in the backyard so the pool salesman gets richer. And it does trickle down if you're in the stream through which water trickles. It doesn't help the unemployed people, but it does help the business owners. But you've got to start with something that kickstarts it. So these construction workers move down there and start building the stadium. Well, how do you pay for the construction workers? The federal government's going to do it. It's not going to cost the Tasmanians that much. That money the construction workers get will go back into the economy. And as Tasmania gets bigger, because of this population boom, they'll need teachers, nurses, cooks, eventually police and prison officers, and a whole bunch of other people to support the increase. Now that's a second boom, a double whammy. So you start to get a trend happening up. And as all the teachers and all the nurses and all the doctors and all the people come down, you need other things to support them. You need more supermarkets and more restaurants. And so the people in Tasmania can open up a cafe, can open up a supermarket, a restaurant, a sporting goods store. New sporting teams will create, suburbs will increase. Then you'll say, oh, we need more roads, we'll need more water treatment plants, we need more power plants. And all the construction workers that have just finished building a stadium can go and build those things, and they'll stay, and the population will get bigger. A lot of the Tasmanians say, well, we've already got a stadium. Rip down Blundstone Arena and put up a new 6-star motel, hotel. That's what we just did in Perth, right on the waterfront. We developed the whole of Elizabeth Quay, and the construction workers stayed, and they will stay now in Perth probably forever. They probably consider themselves West Australian, and the economy is booming. But these people don't seem to understand that that's how it all works. But Michael, I hear you say again, when we sell Tasmania, won't we lose the revenues that we're getting from Tasmania? You mean the 1.3%? That's how much Tasmania actually contributes to just the money that the states raise. That's not including the 550, what is that, billion up there that the Commonwealth government contributes on its own. Honestly, if Tasmania went away, we'd barely notice it financially. So why New Zealand? Well, obviously it's right next door and really close, but I can make an economic argument why it should be as well. The average wage rate in Australia is $41. The average wage rate in New Zealand is $37 in New Zealand dollars, but $38 really in Australian dollars. Ergo, why so much of New Zealand's population lives in Australia. Tasmania's wage rate's $38 too. It's a perfect fit. And the GDP per capita, and this is all in US dollars, of Australia is $60,000 US dollars per person, right? New Zealand's is only $48,000 or 49 really there. They're about 20%, poorer, so to speak, in New Zealand. Honestly, Tasmania in US dollars is even poorer than New Zealand. If Tasmania went to New Zealand, they'd still be playing catch up. So what's the deal? I reckon New Zealand gets to increase its population by about 10%, increase its GDP gross by about 8%. It should get about 1.5 billion, assuming the same tax setup as it is now, which let's assume it is forever, but let's say the next 100 years, it gets $1.5 billion annually. So that's like $150 billion New Zealand's going to get in tax revenues over the next 100 years. If we discount that at 4% a year for the time value of money, I calculate that to be about 73 billion. And I think that's what we should charge New Zealand. So they've got a current debt of 126 billion. Okay, let's up that to 200 billion. But don't worry, they'll pay it off with the $150 billion they're going to get from New Zealand over the next 100 years. Sorry, the 150 billion they're going to get from Tasmania over the next 100 years. But I think that's a good deal for New Zealand. What does Australia get out of it? Well, we get our GST back. WA can get $1 for every dollar we raise, and the people in Western Australia who are working hard can have the things that we need. Yeah, we lose about 1% of our tax base, but we get a $73 billion payment from New Zealand to offset our $900 billion in debt. We reduce our debt by 8% immediately. Think about your home loan, and if I said I could reduce it by 8% just like that, and all I'd have to do is take 1% of your income, you'd take that deal every day of the week. We get an instant boost to our GDP per capita, and we get an increased average wage. So there you go. Yes, that was meant to be a bit tongue-in-cheek. It's really a video about why West Australians are pissed off at Tasmanians, because we make all the money and they spend it all. However, just to go on with, I noticed that New Zealand's famous for this Lord of the Rings thing. Love Lord of the Rings, love the movies, love the books. And they had a whole tourism industry down there. And that whole thing's gagging for a sequel. Now, the sequel that just came on HBO or Amazon or whatever it was terrible. Scrap it. Make a new sequel, film it in Tasmania, which would now be a Kiwi island. So, I don't know, the Mists of Aotearoa or something like that. And it's set in Tasmania. So all the fantasy nerds and things that want to come down and see where the orcs and the hobbits lived and stuff. Flying to Tasmania now, flying into Hobart and seeing that tourist industry down there. Make a go of it. And no, I'm just an accountant. I'm not here to market films. But leave your comments, which I'm sure will be nasty, especially from the Tasmanians, in the section below. Hit like and subscribe. I'll be back with another video shortly. Bye.